Good/evening, everyone. It is often said that life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we react to it. In a world filled with chaos, stress, and uncertainty, the ability to remain calm in every situation is a superpower. A calm mind allows us to think clearly, make better decisions, and live a more fulfilling life. But how do we train our minds to remain composed, even in the most challenging situations? First, we must understand that calmness is not something we are born with. It is a skill that we cultivate through practice. Just as an athlete trains their body for endurance, we must train our minds to develop inner peace. One of the most effective ways to achieve this is through mindfulness and deep breathing. When faced with stress or uncertainty, take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. This simple practice signals your brain to relax, slowing your heart rate and bringing you back to the present moment. Another essential practice is controlling our thoughts. Often our minds create unnecessary panic by imagining worst-case scenarios, but if we consciously shift our perspective and focus on solutions rather than problems, we can regain control over our emotions. Ian had always been a person who reacted quickly to situations, often letting his emotions get the best of him. He had a good heart and was ambitious, but his mind was like a storm, constantly restless, always overthinking, and easily overwhelmed. Whether it was a minor inconvenience or a major setback, he found himself drowning in stress, unable to control his reactions. From a young age, he had been taught that success required hard work, determination, and perseverance. However, no one ever taught him how to handle failure, rejection, or uncertainty. He grew up believing that being strong meant fighting back, reacting instantly, and pushing through no matter the cost. But as he got older, he began to realize that his quick reactions often made things worse rather than better. In college, Ian was one of the top students, always striving to be the best. He believed that perfection was the key to success. His routine was rigid, his expectations high, and his patience thin. If an assignment didn't turn out the way he planned, he would stay up all night redoing it. If a friend canceled plans, he would take it personally, feeling abandoned. If a professor criticized his work, he would replay the conversation in his mind, allowing frustration to consume him. He wanted to be in control of everything, but the irony was that his need for control was controlling him. One day, a situation arose that truly tested him. Ian had spent weeks preparing for an important presentation that could determine his chances of securing an internship at a prestigious company. He had practiced in front of the mirror, recorded himself speaking, and fine-tuned every single slide. He wanted everything to be perfect. But when the day arrived, things did not go as planned. As he stood in front of the panel of judges, his laptop froze and his presentation file refused to open. He felt panic rise in his chest, his heartbeat accelerated, and sweat formed on his forehead. He tried to remain calm, but his mind was racing. The judges waited, unimpressed, as he fumbled with the device. His classmates who were watching from the back of the room whispered among themselves. Time was slipping away, and his confidence was crumbling. Instead of taking a deep breath and thinking of an alternative approach, Ian let his frustration take over. He started pressing buttons furiously, his hands shaking as he struggled to fix the issue. When one of the judges gently suggested that he present without the slides, he snapped, "This isn't my fault. The system isn't working properly." His tone was defensive, his face red with anger. The room fell silent. Ian realized that his outburst had only worsened the situation. The judges exchanged glances before one of them spoke. Technical issues happen. What matters is how you handle them. In that moment, Ian felt the weight of his own actions. He had spent so much time preparing for the content of his presentation, but had never prepared himself for the unexpected. He had trained his mind to focus on perfection, but he had never trained it to remain calm under pressure. That day, he lost the internship opportunity, but more than that, he lost confidence in himself. He replayed the incident over and over, realizing that if he had simply taken a breath, stayed composed, and adapted, things could have turned out differently. He saw how his mind had controlled him rather than the other way around. This moment marked the beginning of a change in Ian. He knew he couldn't continue living like this, constantly reacting, overthinking, and letting emotions dictate his actions. He realized that true strength wasn't in reacting, but in responding with clarity and composure. But the question remained, how could he train his mind to be calm in every situation? Ian thought that the worst had already happened when he lost his internship opportunity because of his inability to stay calm. He promised himself that he would change, that he would learn how to control his emotions rather than let them control him. But promises to oneself are often easier said than done. Life had a way of testing him again, and this time the challenge was far more personal. It started with what seemed like a simple, manageable problem, one that spiraled out of control before he even realized it. Ayan had been working tirelessly on a group project for his final semester. The project carried significant weight toward his final grade, and he had taken it upon himself to ensure that every detail was perfect. He coordinated the research, assigned tasks to his teammates, and reviewed every piece of information that was added. To him, anything less than perfection was unacceptable. But working in a group meant relying on others, something Ayan had never been good at. His teammates had different approaches, different timelines, and different levels of dedication. As the deadline approached, he found himself growing increasingly anxious. Some of the team members missed their submission deadlines, while others didn't meet his expectations in terms of quality. He stayed up night after night redoing parts of their work, fixing mistakes, and ensuring that the final product would reflect the effort he had put into it. Then, just 3 days before the final presentation, Ayan received a message that shattered everything. One of his teammates, who had been responsible for compiling the entire report, had accidentally deleted the main file. Weeks of work were gone in an instant. Ayan felt his heart stop, his hands turned cold, his mind went blank, and then, almost immediately, a surge of anger took over. He didn't even think, he just reacted. He called his teammate, his voice shaking with frustration, and before the other person could even explain, he exploded. "How could you be so careless? Do you have any idea how much effort I put into this? Do you even care about this project, or are you just here to waste everyone's time?" His words were harsh, laced with pure anger. The other person tried to explain, tried to apologize, but Ayan wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his emotions. When he finally hung up, his hands were still trembling. He had let his anger take control once again. His mind, rather than seeking solutions, had immediately resorted to blame. The damage was done, not just to the project, but to his relationships. His teammate, feeling hurt and disrespected, refused to work with him any further. The rest of the team grew distant, uncomfortable with Ayan's intense reactions. Instead of working together to fix the mistake, the team became divided. As the reality of the situation sank in, Ayan felt something heavier than frustration: regret. He had reacted in the moment without thinking, without considering that mistakes happen, that setbacks are part of life. If he had taken just a few seconds to breathe, to calm himself, he could have handled it differently. They could have worked together to recover the lost work. But instead, he had let his emotions make the situation worse. This moment hit him harder than anything before. Losing an internship opportunity had been disappointing, but this was different. This was personal. He had let his emotions hurt the very people he was supposed to work with. He had turned a difficult situation into an impossible one. And for what? Because he couldn't control his immediate reaction. That night, Ayan couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the incident over and over, making him realize how much he needed to change. He needed to learn how to stay calm, no matter how bad a situation seemed. He needed to train his mind to pause before reacting, to find solutions instead of creating more problems. He had always thought that intelligence and hard work were the keys to success, but now he saw that something even more important was missing: emotional control. And if he didn't learn it now, he knew life would keep testing him until he did. Ayan had spent the last few days reflecting on his actions, realizing that his inability to remain calm was causing more harm than he had ever imagined. He had lost an internship opportunity, damaged relationships with his teammates, and worst of all, he had started feeling trapped in a cycle of stress and regret. He knew he had to change, but he didn't know how. It wasn't something he could fix overnight. He needed guidance, someone who could show him a different way of dealing with situations. It was during this period of self-reflection that he found himself sitting alone in the university library, staring blankly at his laptop screen, unable to focus. He hadn't spoken much to anyone since the argument with his teammates. His mind was cluttered with thoughts. What if he had handled things differently? What if he had just taken a moment to breathe before reacting? Lost in thought, he didn't notice an elderly professor walking by until the man stopped near his table. Professor Raymond had been teaching philosophy at the university for decades, known for his wisdom and his calm demeanor. He had seen Ayan in his class before and had noticed the storm of emotions the young man carried with him. That evening, as he observed Ayan's distant expression, he decided to approach him. "You look like someone carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. the professor said, his voice gentle yet firm. Ayan looked up, startled, then sighed. It feels that way, he admitted. The professor pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. Tell me, what is troubling you? At first, Ayan hesitated, unsure whether to share his thoughts, but something about the professor's calm presence made him open up. He spoke about the internship disaster, the group project incident, and how he always seemed to let his emotions get the best of him. I try to stay calm, he said, frustration evident in his voice. But when something goes wrong, I just react, and I always regret it later. The professor listened patiently before responding. Ayan, have you ever observed a pond on a windy day? Ayan frowned, unsure where this was going. Not really. When the wind blows strongly, the surface of the water becomes disturbed. The ripples spread everywhere, making it impossible to see what lies beneath. But when the wind stops, the water settles and everything underneath becomes visible again. Our minds are the same. When we allow emotions like anger, fear, or stress to control us, our thoughts become unclear and we react impulsively. But when we train ourselves to be still, to breathe, to wait before reacting, we gain clarity, and with clarity comes wisdom. Ayan listened intently, his mind absorbing every word. He had never thought of it that way before. He had always believed that reacting quickly was a sign of strength, of being decisive. But now he realized that true strength lay in restraint, in choosing to stay calm even when everything around him was chaotic. But how do I do that? Ayan asked. How do I train my mind to be like that still pond? The professor smiled. You start by practicing awareness. Before reacting to any situation, pause, take a deep breath. Ask yourself, will my reaction help this situation or make it worse? Most of the time, you will realize that a calm response leads to better outcomes. And when you fail, which you will in the beginning, be kind to yourself. Change doesn't happen overnight, but every small effort will take you closer to the person you want to be. Ayan nodded slowly, feeling a shift within him. For the first time, he understood that being calm wasn't about suppressing emotions, it was about mastering them. And he was ready to begin that journey. Ayan left his conversation with Professor Raymond feeling lighter. Yet he knew that simply understanding the concept of a calm mind was not enough. He needed to put it into practice. His entire life, he had allowed his emotions to dictate his reactions. Changing that would require effort, patience, and discipline. He had to retrain his mind, teaching it to pause instead of immediately reacting. His first challenge came the very next morning. As he walked into the university cafe to grab his usual coffee, he found himself stuck in a long queue. He had an important lecture in 10 minutes, and the slow service was testing his patience. His old self would have sighed loudly, tapped his foot in frustration, and even argued with the cashier about the delay. But today, he remembered the professor's words. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that his frustration wouldn't speed up the line. Instead of focusing on how slow things were moving, he chose to observe his surroundings. He noticed a group of students laughing in the corner, a barista humming a song as she worked, and a man in front of him struggling to balance his books and his coffee. Without hesitation, Ayan stepped forward and helped him. The man smiled and thanked him, and at that moment, Ayan realized something important. When his mind wasn't clouded by impatience, he was more aware, more present, and even able to help someone else. Encouraged by this small success, he began actively working on controlling his reactions in different situations. When his younger sister borrowed his headphones and forgot to return them, instead of snapping at her, he calmly asked for them back. When one of his professors gave him constructive criticism on an assignment, instead of feeling personally attacked, he took a breath and asked himself, what can I learn from this? But the real test came a week later, when he had to meet his group members again to submit their project. He knew the tension from their last argument still lingered, and part of him feared that they wouldn't even want to work with him anymore. He had spent the past few days regretting his outburst, but regret alone wasn't enough. He needed to take responsibility for his actions. As he entered the library, he found his group sitting together, quietly discussing final changes. There was an awkward silence when they noticed him. Normally, Ayan would have felt defensive, maybe even tried to justify his past behavior, but this time he did something different. He paused, took a breath, and then spoke. I just want to say that I'm sorry for how I reacted last time, he admitted. I was frustrated, but that's no excuse for how I spoke to you all. I should have handled it better. His teammates exchanged glances, surprised by his words. One of them, Ali, who had been on the receiving end of Ayan's anger, finally responded. I appreciate that, man. We were all stressed, but yelling didn't help anyone. Let's just move forward and finish this. Ayan nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. He realized that in the past, he had always let his emotions dictate his actions. But now, by pausing and choosing a calm response, he had not only repaired a strained relationship, but also set a new standard for himself. As they worked together to finalize the project, Ayan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Not control over others or situations, but control over himself. He was beginning to understand that true strength wasn't about reacting quickly or forcefully. It was about responding thoughtfully. This was just the beginning. But for the first time, he truly believed that he could train his mind to be calm in every situation. Ayan had been making steady progress in training his mind to remain calm. But life had a way of testing lessons when one least expected it. He had handled small inconveniences well, learned to pause before reacting, and even mended his relationships with his teammates. However, he had yet to face a situation that would truly challenge everything he had been practicing. One evening, Ayan was walking back home after a long day at the university. He was in a good mood, feeling proud of how he had controlled his emotions over the past few weeks. Just as he reached his apartment building, his phone rang. It was his best friend, Zaid. Ayan, I need to tell you something, but promise me you'll stay calm. Zaid's voice was hesitant. Ayan immediately felt a surge of tension. Whenever someone started a conversation like that, it usually meant bad news. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath before responding. Go ahead, what happened? Zaid hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. You remember the part-time job you were supposed to start next week? The manager just called me and said they had to give the position to someone else. Something about a miscommunication with HR. I thought you should know before you go there tomorrow. Ayan froze. He had been counting on this job to help with his expenses. He had prepared for it, planned his schedule around it, and now without warning it was gone. His first instinct was to react the way he always had, to get angry, to call the manager and demand an explanation, to rant about how unfair life was. He felt frustration rising in his chest like a wildfire. But then something shifted. He remembered Professor Raymond's words. When the water is disturbed, you can't see clearly, but when it settles, everything becomes visible. This was his moment of truth. If he allowed his emotions to take over, he would lose control again. But if he stayed calm, he might find a better way to handle the situation. Instead of reacting immediately, Ayan inhaled deeply, held his breath for a few seconds, and then exhaled slowly. He did this 3 times until he felt his heartbeat slow down. Then, in the calmest voice he could manage, he asked, Did they say why they made this decision? Zaid seemed surprised by Ayan's composed response. No, not really. They just said it was an internal mistake, and they had to fill the position with someone else. Ayan nodded to himself. All right, I'll call them tomorrow and ask if there are any other openings. If not, I'll start looking for something else. There was a brief silence before Zaid spoke again. Man, I was expecting you to be furious. Are you okay? Ayan let out a small laugh, realizing how different his response was from what it would have been a few weeks ago. I won't lie. I am upset, but getting angry won't change anything. It'll just make me miserable. I'd rather focus on finding a solution. After hanging up, Ayan felt a strange sense of pride. He had just faced an unexpected disappointment, and instead of letting it ruin his evening, he had handled it with clarity and control. He realized that training his mind wasn't about avoiding emotions, it was about managing them. He had allowed himself to feel the frustration, but didn't let it dictate his actions. That night he slept peacefully, knowing that for the first time he had truly mastered his reaction. It wasn't about the situation itself, it was about how he chose to respond to it. And in that moment, he knew he was on the right path. Ayan had come a long way in his journey toward mastering his emotions. But deep down, he knew that true growth wasn't just about handling small frustrations or disappointments. The real test was whether he could maintain his calm in a situation that truly pushed him to his limits. When emotions ran high, when everything seemed to be working against him, when he felt like he was losing control. That test came unexpectedly one evening when he received a call from his mother. Her voice was calm, but he could sense the tension beneath it. Ayan, your father isn't feeling well. It's nothing serious, but we're taking him to the hospital for a checkup. I just thought you should know. Ayan's heart skipped a beat. His father had always been a strong man, rarely falling sick. The thought of something being wrong with him sent a wave of fear through his body. Without thinking, he grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. By the time he reached the hospital, he was overwhelmed with emotions: fear, anxiety, helplessness. He wanted answers, but no one could give them to him immediately. His mother sat in the waiting area, looking composed but worried. Ayan, on the other hand, felt like he was suffocating. He hated waiting, hated not knowing what was happening. His old self would have panicked. He would have paced back and forth, letting his mind spiral into worst-case scenarios. He would have bombarded the nurses with questions, demanded immediate answers, and allowed fear to consume him. But this time, something stopped him. As he sat next to his mother, he heard Professor Rahman's words echo in his mind. When the wind stops, the water settles, and everything becomes clear. He realized that panicking wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't make the doctors work faster or improve his father's condition. The only thing he could control in that moment was his own reaction. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, held his breath for a few seconds, and exhaled slowly. He repeated this until he felt his heart rate slow down. Then, instead of focusing on his fear, he turned to his mother. "Did Dad say anything before coming here? Was he in pain?" he asked, his voice steady. His mother looked at him, a little surprised by his composure. "He said he was feeling weak and dizzy, but he was still joking with me on the way here. I think it's just exhaustion." Aya nodded, feeling a little more at ease. He reminded himself that until he had actual information, there was no point in assuming the worst. He needed to be present, to be strong, for himself and for his family. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor finally came out. "Your father is stable. It looks like his blood pressure dropped due to stress and dehydration. He just needs rest and proper care. You can see him now." Ayan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The relief washed over him, but he noticed something different. His body wasn't tense, his mind wasn't exhausted from overthinking. He had faced his fear without letting it consume him. As he stepped into his father's hospital room, he saw his dad smiling weakly. "You look more worried than I feel," his father teased. Ayan chuckled, sitting beside him. "I'm just glad you're okay." That night, as he walked out of the hospital with his family, he realized something important. Staying calm didn't mean not feeling emotions. It meant not letting emotions control him. He had faced one of his deepest fears, but instead of drowning in panic, he had chosen clarity. And in doing so, he had truly trained his mind to remain calm in every situation. In conclusion, training our minds to be calm is not an overnight process. It requires consistency and dedication. By practicing mindfulness, controlling our thoughts, embracing gratitude, and exercising patience, we can navigate life's uncertainties with a sense of peace. A calm mind is a powerful mind. It is the foundation of strength, wisdom, and true happiness. So let's commit today to developing inner calmness and facing every challenge with grace and resilience. Thank you.